All right, so we want to invite anybody who's watching this conversation to feel free to ask any questions in the comment section. And then if you subscribe to the channel, then you'll be able to find out when we will have a follow-up event. It might be a YouTube Live, it might be just a separate conversation where we'll address some of the questions. So yeah, we'll launch into it. All right. So, Tim, we're just coming out of a gathering here in Glastonbury where we've done something very special, which is come together to experience oneness and unity, but as real individuals, precious individuals, and that's something that's pretty unique, I would say, in the kind of world of oneness experiencing. And it's called Why Your Life Really Matters, which is also the name of your upcoming pod book. So maybe you can just say a little bit about that as a preview.
Yeah. The idea, the reason I've coined this term pod book to describe it is I've written a lot of books, 55 books, so time for a change. And there's something about the immediacy of what we're doing now, of a podcast. And I've wanted to combine the two. So what I'm going to launch is a detailed, step-by-step exposition of the ideas we'll touch on in our conversation in a book form. So chapter by chapter, first this, then this, then this, and it'll extend. It's quite a big body of work. So it's I hope the clarity of a book with the immediacy of a podcast. So I'll be saying it just spontaneously, and there's that feeling of connection that comes from that. I'll have an audience when I do it, and yet it's highly structured. So it's been, since my last book, it's been 8 years, and that's been most days, every day, working on these ideas. So finally, I think this year, I'm ready to share them. So I hope soon that will be launched. And again, if people subscribe or join the newsletter on my website, you can hear when that comes out. And I think it's my major work.
Definitely.
It'll be coming out step by step.
Yeah.
Beginning soon.
The culmination of all of your involvement.
It's the big. I'm getting old, and this is my statement of what I've made of this crazy, interesting, bittersweet being alive business.
And I can definitely attest to the fact that it is profound and powerful and will absolutely transform a lot of people's understandings.
I hope so. I really hope so.
And
Yeah, I hope it's of value, and it's been great to have people find it of value as I'm developing it.
Yeah.
And to be able to put it out in a really organised, coherent way will be great.
Amazing. So I might dip in and out of my notes here.
Yeah.
Okay, so so we're talking about how powerful your ideas are, and many people are excited by everything that you've been exploring, but there's a unique demographic of people that I know that I've told you a lot about, which I feel like in some ways I'm called to sort of represent.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of unique demographic of people who are uniquely supported and influenced by your ideas and the shifting worldviews that you have, and that's people who have been either damaged by self-negating non-duality in various ways, whether it's, having extreme dissociative or depersonalizing effects, or leading to extreme nihilism and, let's say, kind of breakdown of interrelationality and ability to be in relationships and participate in the world. And this is kind of, let's say, an emerging understanding of the dark side of self-negating non-duality, which is very popular and in some ways seems to have kind of penetrated the kind of new age spiritual scene.
Yeah. I've been shocked meeting you, Jessica, and the people that you in your community.
Yeah.
Just how negative.
Exactly.
And the things that I might have approached in a philosophical way, as the whole non-dual or the modern Western version of it has taken off in the last 20 years from when I was first aware of it happening. It has been huge, and the negative impact has shocked me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's great you're doing what you're doing. And I'm really pleased that the ideas that I'm developing can help people get out of that dead end.
Absolutely. So yeah, so one of the things that I'm doing is, on one hand, wanting to spread awareness about these adverse effects that tend to get downplayed or just simply aren't understood.
Yeah.
But also, so yeah, to spread awareness about that, but also to support people who are recovering from some of these damaging effects. And I can just say that so many of the people that I've spoken with have found some aspects of your worldview on, you know, you've kind of shifted from non-duality to what you call uni-duality and what you describe as the uni-visual, so that there's this way in which I would say that your philosophy has, it's helped me to what I say as rebuilding myself and reality from the ground up.
Yeah, wow, what a thing to say, yes.
And you describe your philosophy as emergent, and I think we'll go into that in a bit, of that flip from reductionism to emergentism. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation is because I'm so compelled to share your worldview with people, and how it can benefit people. But it's, a lot of the ideas are not super familiar, let's say.
Yeah.
So I try my best to articulate it, but I find myself kind of failing to capture it concisely. And so it's just great to have you be able to...
See if I can capture it concisely.
Yes, exactly. But definitely more eloquently.
Okay.
And allows me to also clarify some of the parts that I don't fully understand yet.
Yeah.
So I think what we talked about doing was going through some of the main teachings, or let's say assumptions or messages of self-negating non-duality that have been, let's say, limiting or in some ways very damaging to people. And then hearing how, for some of these ideas, let's say you never fully agreed with the complete negation of the self or the trivialization of the self, but also how you've shifted your views on some of those more, let's say, maybe traditional non-dual ideas. I think it starts with the theory of identity and self. And of course, the main message being that there is no self. And that big revelation of you're not a person. You don't exist. The self is unreal. And the purpose of awakening is to either eradicate the self or see through it as just an illusion, or in some ways to see it as meaningless or trivialized. And one of the things that you've done so incredibly is not just to help people have a different ideal of awakening, that it's not about negating the self, and also to make people who have lost their sense of self in a way that's been very tragic or dehumanizing, to not just be able to have a compelling way to understand the self as actually real, but to feel excited about re-embracing personhood and the self. And that's one of the hardest things to do is, well, I would love to be able to re-embrace the self, but on one hand, how can I possibly see it as real again? And then B, how can I be motivated to go back to personhood and engaging interpersonally? So maybe we can just start with your views on the non-existence of self.
Yeah. Let's start.
Dive right in.
Let's start with the crux of the matter, because there's many aspects of philosophy which are of interest but don't necessarily impact on people's lives. But this is something which has a massive impact and can put people into states which are psychologically damaging. There's no doubt about that. So, funnily enough, this morning I was looking at X, Twitter, and amongst the things that came up, this came up, and I thought this is relevant. It's just moved. How about that? Give me a moment. This came up from Deepak Chopra, who has become increasingly saying these ideas. And it kind of captured exactly what you're saying. So this might be helpful to just sort of, I'm not particularly wanting to deal with Deepak, but it's a good statement. He says, in the deeper reality, you are not a person, but the self in which the person is a flickering, flashing dream. Liberation is not of the person, but from the person.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that this highlights is that so much confusion can happen because of the words. So he's using the word self here in a completely different way than you did, where it's often used to mean the person. Here he's meaning it to mean some greater thing, of which this is a dream. And, you know, I sat with Deepak. I had breakfast with him in America at a conference we were both speaking at. And we sat down and tried to have this out with him. And it was lovely. I enjoyed speaking with him. And Rick Archer from Buddha at the Gas Pump spotted us and came zooming over and said, "Can I film this? Can I film this?" And we said, "Yeah, sure." And we arranged to meet that night. And I'd been, the organisers of the conference had put me up in this lovely suite very generously. I said, "Well, we can use my suite." So we arranged to meet in my suite and film it, but as Deepak went, I just said to Rick, he won't show up, and he didn't show up, and so we had all the films up and everything, and he didn't show, and it's a shame because I would love to engage with someone like Deepak, and really go deep into it, because then you get the feedback. So one thing that's important for me is I don't want to set up a straw man, as they say. I don't want to attack something or be critical of something which doesn't do it justice. And it's important that anyone watching this film realizes I have written and studied over decades on this very subject. I'm not just someone who doesn't understand what non-duality is. I absolutely understand what it is. And if you look at my books, you'll see that. So please don't leave comments going, "You don't understand, it's really this." I really do. I just come to think it's wrong. So what that message is saying behind all the different languages, you're not really Jessica, you're something else. Now, if you're having a hard time being Jessica, that can sound like, "Oh, great."
Which I was.
Yes, that feels great. I'm not Tim, because Tim
the
is really
ultimate revelation.
He's a bit of a, it's like hard being Tim. I'm something else. So that feels attractive, but actually it's incredibly negative to go, look, you, and not just you, but everyone you love, my kids, my dog, everything, everything, your parents, the friend, they're all what? They're an illusion. And there's a deeper thing which has fallen into this illusion. So life itself is a negative. It's a place where you've become trapped in an illusion. For some reason, the self or God or consciousness or whatever name you give for that thing which is more than, has fallen into this this dream and needs to wake up.
Exactly.
And when you wake up, it's not you that wakes up, it's God that wakes up, or the self that wakes up. Now, what that leads to or can do is a condition that's known in psychology as depersonalization, which it sounds like you had, where you actually become this, you see yourself as this presence which is witnessing everything, but you're not in it anymore. You're this observer. Now, all of these things are complex because actually learning to come into a place where you can observe is really healthy. If I can observe myself, Tim, but it's Tim who's observing himself. It's not I am now something else observing Tim. Tim observes his processing, his thoughts. That's really healthy. Sees how he's reacting, learns from that. These are all what I would call emergent states. But if it becomes disassociated, then the healthy act of witnessing and observing becomes a very unhealthy division where you're this other thing and you're witnessing Tim just happening and you're not that. So dissociation. So we can have all these, you can have all the advantages of spirituality, like being able to witness yourself without the negatives of dissociation. And so what I want to present is a different theory of identity. Shall I just go and try and dive into the theory of identity?
Yes, but I just wanted to add a couple things because there is the witnessing experience that can happen, but there's also, for me, and maybe this would be considered, I don't know, maybe more of like radical non-duality, but just the total dissolution of the sense of self, where it's just this total disappearance. It's not even like there's a witness and there's what's being witnessed. It's just the complete absence of any of a person or even basically just a complete erasure. And that's a different experience as well that
Yeah.
has obviously dissociative, because for me it was, the dissolution of physicality. And so it's an even more sort of extreme position than witnessing. Because
Yeah.
a lot of times folks will say, well, the witnessing position is only halfway
Yeah,
to the ultimate of just the complete dissolution and absence
Yeah.
of a perceiver or what have you. And I also...
So to what I would like to explore then with you, Jessica, is two aspects of the philosophy that I've been developing.
Yeah.
One is what we mean by identity, and then the other is what we mean by being conscious. Because I think if you can understand those two in a different way, you can see how these states in which the self dissolves, so you don't see the self, your selfless experiences, timeless experiences, these can be beautiful and wonderful and healthy when the self, the individual, is not negated.
Right.
So those are the two fit together. I don't know which one you want to go for first, but they fit together. Let's go for identity.
Okay.
All right, because then we can maybe tactile consciousness. So Deepak, and not obviously just Deepak, but this idea, your identity is irrelevant, this is an illusion. Your real identity
This is the false self.
Yeah, false
versus
self.
the
Your
true
real
self.
identity is something else. I have said things like that. There are elements which are kind of resonant in a different way in some of my early books, for sure. I don't see it like that at all anymore. The fundamental insight, and I'm going to try and do this really quickly, but it's a lot, and it's unfamiliar, so bear with me. I'll do my best. Is going, look, what is this we're in? Well, in every moment is new. Every moment is the formation of something new based on what happened before. And this moment, and this moment, and this moment. And contains within it what happened before. Because it couldn't be this without that. Whether that's you coming to England and us saying we'll do this conversation, or you getting born, or human beings evolving at all, or language, or life, or the whole universe. So everything has led to this moment. And it's been one process of what was there before in a new way? What was there before in a new way? So the simple and elegant, and I can talk maybe later about why what I call elegance is so important. The I'm following is, given that everything I've ever experienced has been this process, maybe that's what existence is. That the simple insight to understand is, existence is a process of the realization of new possibilities in ever more emergent ways. Where emergent just means you couldn't have that without this. Whether it's, or you couldn't have a multicellular organism until you got a single cellular organism. Yeah. Well, you couldn't have a single cell until you got chemicals. You couldn't have chemicals until you'd have the Big Bang, and blah, blah, blah. And if we mix that in now with what the scientific worldview has taught us, just as an aside, what I'm trying to articulate is a post-scientific spirituality, because all of the great traditions, which I've written on, I admire, I see what I'm doing as an extension of them, not a negation of them, but they've all evolved themselves, but they're all happened before the scientific revolution, where we've had this massive explosion of knowledge. So now spirituality needs to take all of that into account and come into a new post-scientific form. So what science has shown us is the whole universe has evolved. We've only known that for 100 years. But it's huge.
Only 100, huh?
Yeah. Great. And it's only been accepted for less than that. It makes sense of everything. So what I'm exploring is, what if everything that has any form whatsoever, any form, is all part of one process? Because it's one. So the one has differentiated into all of this. So this is all the one in relationship with itself as all of these different systems, including on a very emergent level, you and me. Yeah. And we're functioning as biological entities, but we're also functioning as a psyche. Psyche is just the Greek word that means soul. We're souls, and that's evolved. And here we are, we're meeting as souls. And that's what the universe has become. So what does that do? Well, firstly, it says that the universe itself is made of everything it's been. It's made of its own past. It's a process. And as the past has, the phrase I like is that the past hasn't passed. It's accumulated.
Yeah, that's a huge shift.
It's accumulated. There's more time has passed, so there's more of the past. And that the past makes everything what it is. So I'm like I am because of all of the things which have evolved in the past to make a human being, and then this particular route through my parents and then my particularity and the ideas I've come across and not the ideas I haven't come across. It's my past that makes me me.
Yes.
So when you meet me, you're meeting a system, let's call it. The system just means a whole, really, an integrated whole. I'm an integrated whole, and you're meeting me, and I am that oneness, the undifferentiatedness that's differentiated as Tim through a 14 billion year process, which has arrived here. And you're like that, except you're different to me, similar but different. So we're both the one in relationship to itself, but we're individual.
Yeah.
Now, that's a very different theory of identity, because it's going, look, everything is the one, because the one is undifferentiated. Everything is the one. But as it differentiates, it individuates. So one of the things I came across when I was studying this years and years ago was this as an idea of, well, if it's all one, it can't be all individual and separate.
How could it be one and two?
Yeah, how can it be that? And my answer is, it is one and two. It's the one in relationship with itself. And of course it can be one and many systems. Look, the universe is a universe. It's a one. But it's made up of all these different things in relationship with each other. And the ancient, very old image of the ocean captures that for me. It's like, well, it's clearly one ocean. It doesn't, it's like, there it is, it's the one ocean. But all of these different waves are in relationship with each other, and they'll bash into each other and they'll move it. And that's a lovely poetic image.
It is, yes.
We've arose, it's one thing, and that one thing is the undifferentiated. It's not the self. It's not consciousness. It's not God. It's the simplest thing, I feel. If this process of emergence is one in which it's becoming richer and richer because it's becoming more and more differentiated, then the root of it isn't something which is conscious. It's certainly not a super being like God or the self that's dreaming, whatever that could mean. How's it dreaming? Because when I dream, I take images from this world and create a world. Well, what's it mean it's dreaming it?
What's it drawing on?
Or how's it imagining it? And where did it come from? And all of those questions. If we raise all of that and just go, no, the simplest thing is where it's come from. Well, what's the simplest? Well, the one as two, uni-duality.
Yeah.
And this is not a new idea. The Taoists had this idea. You can see it in a lot of the spiritual traditions. The one as two is the root of everything. And without projecting onto it other qualities, like it's conscious and it's a self and it's a God. No, it's the one as two. It's something you can understand with maths. And that
my worst nightmare.
Yeah, but because it's so why? Because it's so far away from the human experience.
Right.
It's the opposite end. That's why it seems cold and dry, and it's like it is, because there's nothing. There's just one as two. But that one as two, when that evolves and emerged, will become the universe, and will become life, and will become consciousness.
And you're not reducing the world to the numbers or to that. And so like you've said, it's not that you're saying that everything's really this matrix.
Okay, so that's a key.
Go there?
Yeah, no, that's a key thing, and then we'll maybe look at consciousness. So that's really key. Is that when you go look, there is throughout history, human beings quite reasonably have taken the view that what was there at the beginning is what's real. So if I go, look, it's the one as two and it's mathematical, it sounds like, oh, you mean it's all just maths, really? And there is a view you get in physics where people will say that. It's horrible. There's a lot of people who do see this as a kind of matrix. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the whole process of emergence is all real. None of it's an illusion. It's not an illusion like the reductionist scientists say, where they go, you think you're just agreeing and you think you're in love with your dog, and
just chemicals,
but it's just
or,
chemicals, and chemicals is
thing.
really physics, and physics is really maths, and not that. What I'm suggesting is no. It's the whole process is real. It just starts very simply and becomes ever more complex and rich, and so that you get from the level of reality which we can understand with maths right to the level of reality you can only understand with language about the psyche and beauty. And I'll tell you the example I always think of, because I love music, is I play a piece of music on my computer and I know it's an MP3, it's digital information. Mm-hmm. It is. But if you just showed me the digital information, it wouldn't make my heart sing.
There's no music.
I wouldn't tap my foot. It's become this. And which is it? It's all of that, which is real. It's all real.
Yeah, and it can't be reduced.
So the very first thing is, look, there's no great self outside of this. We can come to why I think it has evolved, mm-hmm. but there's no thing at the beginning which this is a dream of. Or, no.
That we've fallen from.
Nothing we've fallen from. Beautiful. Yes, exactly right. Nothing we've fallen from, but rather something we're evolving into.
Yes. Not that we have to get back to.
No, we have to grow into.
Or that's more important, or more valuable, or more spiritual.
Yes. And so this is a major flip, because most of spirituality is pre-evolutionary. Mm-hmm. They didn't understand that. How could they? So they were having an experience of something greater than them. We'll come on and maybe talk about that idea that there is something greater than us, because I do think there is. It's just I don't think it's at the beginning. I think it's where we're evolving into
and
the
that
thing.
We're part of it.
And we are how it is evolving. So that you get, instead of this negative view, which is there's the self or God or Christ, and we've fallen from it into this illusion, we've got to get out, and the whole thing with, oh, this is some terrible shithole, and if we never have to come back here again, and all of that. Yeah, this turns that around. It doesn't negate any of the spiritual experiences, it sees them in a different way. Mm-hmm. And it goes, no, we're evolving from something really simple into something utterly sublime and beautiful and loving and amazing, and that's where we're going. So when you're having these spiritual experiences, and by that the root of what I mean by that is just simply you're experiencing that there's more going on to life than just your socio-biological concerns. And they are beautiful, actually, I think. All of that stuff that makes up a human life, fantastic. But there's something else as well. Yeah. Something which you could call spiritual, something which is sublime as well, that those states that you enter into when you experience that, they're not negating you. They are taking you to the next level. They are allowing you, because you're part of this process of emergence, to realizing new possibilities. You realize a new possibility. For instance, the moment then you go, hang on, I'm not just a separate thing. There's a fundamental oneness to everything, mm-hmm. and I'm experiencing it. Huge jump. And
that it's also that.
Well, that's what I mean by the unividual.
Right, that you're more. That it's that you're more than separate. It's not that you're not separate. It's that you're separate and one.
Yes.
Hence the unidual.
Yeah, or some people struggle with the word separate. I don't, but people do. So maybe we can just say individual.
Yes,
that you're you've arisen as an individual. Now here's the thing, Jessica, which is it's like it's taken 14 billion years to develop a conscious individual, you. Us. And then someone comes along and goes, you're nothing, you don't exist, it's not important.
It's a mistake.
You've become this being who can reflect, who can think, who can imagine, can choose how they live. These are really important emergent things. And then a spirituality which negates all of that and says it's not valuable, it's not real, and you need to get away from it.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And no wonder it messes people up.
Yeah, that's the trivialization of it. So when you put it into that, also the evolutionary perspective of how long it's taken for this to emerge and how freaking incredible that is.
Yeah.
You know, to celebrate it, to see it as significant. That was a major, major, major shift.
Yeah.
And that, I want to pause you for a second to just kind of interject with how some of these shifts have been so transformative for people coming out of that sort of either or view, that you can either be separate or one. There's no separation, it's all one. Whereas this view is that, as you said, it's the one as two. So you get the one in relationship with itself, but that we are really that as this. And
Yes.
that's the as part has been really huge. And it's, you know, it's a 2-letter word, but it makes all the difference that we can be both. And when you talk about the one in relationship with itself, this is also so beautiful that let's say that one or that ground of being has actually been able to, and being becoming is also something that I've, you know, picked up on from folks like yourself and other traditions that emphasize that, is that instead of saying that, you know, what you really are is just being, it's that, well, all of this is all the, you know, whether we say manifestation of being, but this is what being has become. So to denigrate that and to try to reduce it back to its, you know, foundational level, just, it seems at this point to me just so tragic. And I also wanted to pick up on, sorry, no, I forgot.
Well, let me take it somewhere. I would like to pick up on consciousness and how this relates to it, because I want to return to, there's a few things I want to return to that's come up if we can. One is your delight in the particularity of things, and I want to come back to that. But first I want to come back to the question of, hang on, I experienced the dissolution of the self, even of the body, everything, you know, it's like, and what's that? And I think all of that becomes understandable once we start to get a clearer idea of what we mean by consciousness or being conscious. So one of the things is, for me, is it now seems incomprehensible to me, even though I wrote lots of books which included this idea, for which I can only apologise, that there's a thing called consciousness, or a presence called consciousness. Certainly that it's at the beginning. There's this thing which is conscious of itself, or I don't even, what that even mean, and how would it be, and all sorts. And what I've ended up with, I'm not going to go into criticising all of that, but you know, what I've ended up with is something which is much more obvious. And I like that. Most of what I'm saying is pretty obvious, actually.
Although others would say it's obvious that everything's in consciousness.
Well, we should go for that, and why people end up saying that. We should, and why I've said that. We should definitely go for that. But for most folks who haven't been contaminated by those ideas, it seems to me that what we mean by being conscious is you're conscious of some things, you're not of others. It's a way. So if you are a system in relationship with the universe, it's a particularly emergent form of that relationship. So I'm taking in things mostly unconsciously right now, as are you. And so I haven't been aware of the door, which is over here, to the garden. I am now, because I've just, and probably you are now, because I've just mentioned it. I was aware of it
the whole time.
You weren't? No, see? But if someone came running through that, going fire, 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 we would go there. Why? You know, or think when you're asleep at night. You're completely asleep and someone comes into the room shouting. Well, you'd hear that even though you were unconscious. Well, you might be dreaming and conscious of that, but if you were completely unconscious. So it seems to me that consciousness is, you could call it a high definition processing.
I like that.
So every system since the very, very beginning has been in relationship with all the other systems in its ecosystem, even on a physical level, right the way down. And it's reading that in some way. It's interacting as in a chemical or electrochemical way, for instance. It's not conscious, but it's relating. And then that is going to turn into life. Still not conscious, but a higher level of relating, taking in more information. And then you get the beginning of the senses. Like the plants behind us, they can register the light. Not conscious, but they're registering the light. And so you're getting this evolving of the ability to sense the world around you. Now, once you have life, you have death. Systems that can only hold themselves together, they're so fragile, they can't hold themselves together for that long, they're so complex. So some of that information about the world really matters because your life depends on it. But a lot of the information doesn't really matter. Most of it doesn't really matter. And so what's happened, I think, is that life has evolved to be able to process what matters in high definition, so you really get it, process it in detail, and the rest of it in low definition, because you don't need to. And then you can move it around, and it's learned to do this. You can see when this evolved, where it learned to move the attention. So you could move your attention around your experience and pick on what bits you want to process in high definition. And then it learned to do that on itself. And you had the psyche or the soul, where it can actually look at its own processing and process some of it in high definition, which is what we do when we internalize our processing. Now, once you get that, it becomes much easier to understand what's going on with spiritual experiences, especially the more, and I would say, in many ways, very beautiful, extreme experiences like no self or no time. Because wherever you put your attention is in high definition. If you spontaneously, or you learn through meditative practices or guidance, you learn to put your attention on the formless ground of being, let's call it, thing which is undifferentiated, which is here as well as all the differentiation. It's a tricky thing to begin with, but if it just happens, or you put your attention on it, if you completely lose yourself into that, you're not conscious of anything else.
Yeah.
And so if you are not conscious, for instance, of anything changing, it will be timeless. If you pay attention, you can get it even if you're just with somebody else and you just dissolve into them. It's like, I wasn't conscious of myself. I just lost myself in you.
The flow state. This is what's happening.
Then anywhere where you focus will come into really, really, and if you go deeply enough, you will lose that sense of yourself or of time, but it hasn't gone anywhere.
This is a major shift. I want to pause you for a second there, because that's one aspect of what you're sharing that has been so helpful for people, that to shift the sense that, okay, well, I experienced the dissolution of self. I experienced directly no self, if you will. But what you're suggesting is that it's actually an attentional thing. So it doesn't mean that the self didn't exist anymore. It meant that you weren't focused on self or the sense of self. And so it also, the mind quieted. But as you're saying, you can go into these, let's say, deep absorption type of experiences. Might be more of what I was talking about, where you've, in some ways, through meditative practices too, you can hone your attention so much to focus in on what's maybe you could say not self, or not.
Yeah, something which is either the ground, or we can discuss, or you can open up into something which is greater than you. I think there is we've evolved a greater level than just our individual psyches. We can talk about that later. But so you can pay attention to that so deeply. I've had this, it's amazing. And you enter a state, well, if I think of one of the things that happened for me, was just light. There was no Tim, there was no anything. There was, and just unbelievably amazing, beautiful. Now, if you've been told you're not really a self, you will go, the self dissolved. It didn't exist. If you understand, no, you are. You're an emerging thread in this one evolutionary process. What's happened then is you've evolved to the level where you can not just pay attention to yourself, which is what you do most of the time.
Yes.
You can pay attention fully to something else, which is what meditative practice is about. And then you, the individual, experiences something where you're not focused on yourself at all.
Right.
And it's amazing.
And this, I think, is important to talk about how, and we'll get at some point to talking about ultimate truth and whether or not there's something called self-evident ultimate truth, but how if you are given, as you said, if you're told first, before you're pointed to these experiences, that what it means is the eradication of self, or it's proving that there is no self, then that's the experience you'll have, and you'll conclude that you've discovered that is true. Yeah. And what you're saying is that those experiences are real, they can be profound, they can be positive or negative, yeah. But they're always pretty, surprising and astonishing, yeah. But that there can be another way to interpret that does not suggest that it's the proof of the non-existence of yeah. self. And yeah. If you frame it differently from the beginning, you may not go through this radical sense of depersonalization, and you can still have these expansive experiences without concluding from it that I don't exist.
Exactly right. In fact, the opposite. Mm-hmm. So for me, when my attention began to come back onto Tim in the experience I was talking about earlier, it was with delight. It was like, oh, and now Tim is in a different, it's like, wow, me.
And you liked Tim.
Yeah.
So you weren't having this experience where, oh my God, Tim is gone and now everything is better. And since it can feel that way, then when Tim comes back, it's like, oh, fuck.
I felt a real poignancy yeah. for Tim mm-hmm. and for being Tim. And that Tim and me had that experience. And that I was part of this one which had emerged. I tell you, here's a great analogy, I think. Tell me if it works for you.
I will.
Which is, if I went to bed tonight and slept, went into deep sleep, yeah, went into deep sleep, let's leave dreaming to one side, went into deep sleep and came out afterwards and went, I realised I didn't exist. I just didn't exist. There was no bedroom, there was no Tim, that's reality. I don't exist. You go, no, Tim, you were asleep. You just weren't paying attention. You weren't conscious of being Tim. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you woke up, you were conscious of being Tim. And there he was, just where you left him, on the bed. And there's your psyche. Or if you went in a dream and you went, no, I was in a different world. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, yeah, of course. But that was still you. No, it wasn't me. You don't understand. I was different. I had I could fly.
I had a tail.
You had a tail and I could fly. It's like, yeah, but that's because it's still you. It's you dreaming. Mm-hmm. And now you're you awake. It's all you. That would be a much saner way of dealing with those experiences, because there are people who are so frightened they'll cease to exist when they go to sleep.
Yes, you do hear people can get a little OCD about that.
Yeah, because they're scared. It's like, oh,
they're going to die.
I'll disappear. Mm-hmm. So, and why this matters for so many reasons. But one of the things, if you're interested in these more emergent states, is that it sets up, and I had this when I was much younger a lot, where you'd find yourself rushing into these extraordinary states of where you don't exist and feel resistance. And the resistance is, I'm going to disappear.
I'm never going to come back.
I'm never going to come back. I'm going to die. And because that would not be healthy. That, you've just spent, well, I was in my 20s, so I'd spent 20-something years creating Tim, and it was going to just go. It's like, no. But if you understand, it will be fine. It will be fine. You can go into these states, but it's you going into these states. You can actually focus so much on not yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's really a wonderful thing to be able to do. And then when it's the time, you'll bring your self-attention back and take care of yourself and carry on your journey. But now you're different because you know that there's this other level to it.
Right. So it's the self has a more expanded view of things. So it's not that you expand your view in order to trivialize or negate the self.
Beautifully
but that the self now can be transformed in some way by that ability to have a greater, let's say, for me, I would say like a greater context that you exist within.
Yes.
But I want to say something, because you said this would be a much saner view or healthier. We have to really look at what a contrast that is to self-negating non-duality, that suggests that the pinnacle of well-being, the pinnacle of spiritual attainment is the permanent absence of the self. Yeah. And they suggest that is the healthiest way to be. Yeah. So again, just kind of coming back to this shift and shifting what you consider to be healthy, spiritually healthy, and shifting your spiritual ideals. And that's difficult. So this is another way that, having this other sort of way to look at it can be more compelling to people and give them, that different perspective, that maybe the point of this is maybe that's not the healthiest way to be, with permanently eradicated sense of self.
I mean, what a message. The whole point of life is for you not to exist.
Yeah. That's exactly.
Or to see through, or to see how you're caught in a trap. And this is whether you think that or not, one must at least see that as a very negative thing. And the reason I've ended up with what I've ended up with, which is this idea, just to tie it in with what you said at the beginning, that we can evolve as individuals into univigils, which is a name I've coined to try and create this understanding that you can those spiritual experiences, they're great, really important, because you become more than you were before. You are now an individual who is experiencing, not just like I understand, but actually experiencing this unity with other people, with the nature, with the universe.
As an individual.
And feeling it as love and connection and benevolence. And that's a feeling that goes right into the body. Well, what body? Your body, your individual body. And then what do you do with it? You live from it in your actual life, interacting with the people in your life and the possibilities and dreams that your psyche creates, that you could bring goodness and improve, play a role in the evolutionary process.
To participate in reality.
Your life has meaning, hence your life really matters. Your life matters because you are waking up. You are the universe as you.
And how significant is that?
Waking up to a new possibility, which is recognizing that oneness or recognizing these higher states.
And as you've also said, there's a perspective which is also so significant, where the universe is kind of waking up to itself and now getting able to consciously play a role in its own evolution, but as the individuals it has become.
Completely, which is why, I think the whole doctrine which gets associated with the negative non-duality that you're exploring and helping people get out of, that somehow not only you don't have any choice, it's like if you don't have choice, if then there is absolutely no meaning in anything. Because even now, for someone listening to this, if you don't think you have choice, you might as well turn off, because there'll be no choice you can have to go, oh, that makes sense, or it doesn't make sense. You have no agency. And that's the point, because it's a way of getting you out of the idea that you're a self.
And that's can be one of the most damaging effects, is the loss of agency.
Whereas I would say the universe has always been creative, because it's always coming into new relationships. It's never the same twice. Well, that's a form of creativity. It's always throwing up new possibilities, from new genetic strains that will create new species. I mean, they trace the whole of life to one cell. The last universal common ancestor, Luca.
It has a name?
They give it a name.
The cell.
Yeah, I don't think it called itself that, but that's what they call it. And so that's the level of differentiation that's happened. And that's an immensely creative process, throwing up new possibilities. Some succeed, some don't. Well, we're experiencing that with ideas right now. And that took billions of years. But you and I, and anyone listening to this, you've got new ideas coming up. You might be hearing new ideas from us. You may be hearing your own new ideas. All of that creativity is happening. And essentially, that's what we experience as choice. So we imagine different potentials, and then we can do one or the other, and we can be a choice of many things. To become conscious of possibilities that haven't happened yet, that's an incredibly emergent thing. It took a long time to get to that. Not just conscious of what has happened, but conscious of being able to imagine what could happen. And it's obviously not just human beings that do that, other forms of life do that. But we do it really well, because we have so many ideas. And we can, well, where's all this come from? We're surrounded by cameras and lights and a kitchen and the internet and my phone, and it's like all of that has come from people imagining things that don't exist, and then using the agency to bring them into existence. So to negate that is like, wow, really? You want to negate that process?
But don't forget that, as we've talked about, it is a double-edged sword, because it can become unhealthy when people get fixated on the future, right? And you get, as you've kind of said before, there's let's say healthy ways of imagining future possibilities, but then there's also times that can lead to unhealthiness. So it makes sense that people would see it as, oh, we want to have an end to self-reflection and, you know, to self-referential thought and to the timeline. But there's another way to look at it where it's utterly incredible and beautiful, and how amazing that we can bring, you know, these visions into reality. And as you've said, self-reflection can be seen as a superpower, because that's how we can bring about change.
But I think that I do see it as a superpower for sure, and really important. That's how we know ourselves. The spiritual injunction all the way through is we know yourself. Well, how do you do that? Well, you come into a place where you can see yourself, see how you're processing, make that conscious. That's a really hard thing to do. That's the positive witnessing. And in I'm 65 and it's still going on, and I feel like a beginner. But what you were saying about the negative aspects, that's right. There's always negative aspects with every emergence.
Right.
You know, it's like as you become more conscious, you're conscious that you're going to die. Well, that's like uncomfortable. And, you know, when you get the conscious of pleasure, you're also getting conscious of pain. And that's,
and if you love,
you don't like that. And if you love all of that. So that's, I think, the traditional call for wisdom, which is how do you deal with that? Well, you need to be conscious. You know, when people say, just be in the moment. It's like, what? That's nonsense, isn't it? Just be in the moment would be a disaster.
Right.
But the ability to be able to focus on the immediacy of this, that's beautiful. But when the time comes,
to be able
it's like,
to
right
shift
now,
in and
I'm
out.
completely engrossed with you.
Yeah.
Completely. But the time will come when we have to go, oh, we've done this for long enough now. And that is time. And then we'll stop. And we'll, you know, because we have to do that. So it's like everything finds its place. And if you are fixated on one thought, I mean, thinking's just talking to yourself in your imagination. So if you repeat anxious thoughts over and over again, it's not going to be good. Right. But if you never were able to think of, oh, don't do that, that could be a disaster, then you would have disaster.
This is how you go from, the non-duality I was into was taking you from one extreme of excessive rumination to then just a total blanked out vacuousness, you know, a difficulty to even, you know, conjure up conversation topics or things like that, which just takes it to, you know, we want to get to a healthy balance, right?
That's horrible that you were experiencing that.
Yeah, but, you know, but in the beginning that felt liberating.
I get that. I get why that would be.
It's just when it becomes radicalized that's how it should always be. And become dysfunctional.
That's because in itself, as a passing phase or passing experience, it is healthy.
It can be.
It's great. I mean, why not? To be able to step out yourself. I mean, it's like, as much as I want to go, look, it's so great that we can reflect and we can talk to each other and talk to ourselves. But it's a bit like if we did nothing but talk, you'd be like, oh, just be quiet for 5 minutes.
Right.
So the silence.
But if we did nothing but be silent for 5 years.
And the great thing about attention is we can move it around. So I can pay attention to you, I can pay attention to myself, I can pay attention to the silence. It's like, wow, I can move it about. So I have that choice of where I put it.
And if I could say something on this, that another major shift is from having let's say a negativity bias towards the human condition and towards self-reflection and towards the self and towards, you know, all of these things, to shift towards having, let's say, either more of a balanced view or have a positivity bias. To be able to look at the self or reality and human existence and say, well, there's so much suffering, or the mind creates so much, you know, pain and suffering, but at the same time, there's so much delight in being able to even revel in a beautiful memory, or to be able to, you know, see imagery in your mind, and that self-reflection and the imaginal world, you call it the imaginal, to be able to see preciousness in it and not just see what's negative. And that's all that gets hammered in a lot of non-dual spirituality or any type of, you know, anti-thought or sort of ego denigrating type of spirituality, is only looks at what's bad in it.
Yeah.
So it's another way of shifting that's helpful to people, to say, well, wait a minute, the ego causes suffering, but it's also precious and beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the ego is a difficult word because people use it in such widely different ways. I mean, because one thing which does seem to be true, I think, is that as you unividuate, as you come up into something greater than where you were before, your attention becomes, there's a benevolence, a general benevolence, a wishing well to everything and everyone, a great, what I call a big love starts to emerge. And so you do become less egocentric. You know, it isn't all about me.
Exactly.
Increasingly, it's more about what I can give, how I can, and that feels great, actually, for the individual. But it's also the individual giving themselves away and contributing, and so you do. But it's like a maturation. You know, it's like the next level of growing up.
Right.
Is do that.
And it also kind of points to what you've talked about too, which is that conflation of egotism with ego.
Yeah.
That of course we would like most people to be less, we don't want to have egomaniacs or have egomania, but that we don't want to eradicate the entire thing.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
you could see,
a lot of people do. But.
You could see that the egotism or that kind of negative narcissism is the perfect balance or opposite of the erasure of the self.
Yeah.
Because one's going, it's just me, and one's going, there is no me, and in the middle you're going, well, there's both. I am the one arising as Tim in relationship to all of this, and most people have that to some extent with other people, and so then it's not just about me.
Yeah.
It's about me in relationship with you.
And it's expanding your identity rather than deleting it, right?
Yeah.
That you're including more in your sense of what's also you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's so many other things we could dive into.
I know.
How are you feeling? What do you want? Is there something you'd want to focus on? That's.
I mean, we do have non-doership. I'm not sure if we should go there.
Well, the non-doership is very much to do with the choice thing, I think. And again, it's the idea that I think it arises because I think it comes mainly from people experiencing the witnessing state. So you come into the witnessing state, and I think the way I would describe what's actually happening is the system is watching itself, and that's very healthy. If you've been told that is your real identity,
what you really are,
and it's separate from, or it's not this, then you're witnessing this just happen.
Exactly.
So I can come into it now where it's just happening, but I understand it's still me, because most of what I do is unconscious. I'm conscious when I say these words. I'm not making them happen beforehand. It's happening spontaneously, and so you see that. And if you understand that it's all coming from the individual, that's really healthy. If you see it as separate, then you can go, oh, there's no doer, there's no self, there's no... And then it's a matter, again, about identity. Who is the self you're thinking
This
of?
is what I wanted to say, was that a big shift for me, and that helps a lot of people get out of that sort of, that non-doership when that becomes something unhealthy for them, is to redefine what the doer is, and to actually expand the sense of what the doer is, so that the doer isn't necessarily, just the thinking, or that. And what I wanted you to maybe say is how you perceive the self as this whole ecosystem. That the self is actually the whole, as you said, psychobiological system. So the doer is all of that.
Yes.
So if your thinking falls away, that doesn't mean that you're not.
You're still
doing
processing.
This, because it's the whole system that's doing it.
Exactly right. You're processing all the time, nearly everything unconsciously. Just to move without falling over means you have to process so much. So if you get this kind of crazy idea that the only thing you're doing is the bit you do intentionally, if you mean that, then you can turn that right down. Just don't pay attention to intending, and it will all happen unconsciously. But what you are is not the conscious bit. You are the whole system, which has the ability to be conscious of where it focuses.
Right. And people forget about the unconscious element of self that's always there.
Always, on a biological level, on a psychological level. You're the whole thing, going right back and back and back. You are a process in time, which has arrived here and is functioning on all of these different levels. That's who you are. And it is choosing that all the time. Like but mostly unconsciously. So, I'm not consciously doing this weird thing I do with my hands. Yeah. That's just my nature. But the body is making that happen.
The system of you is still
doing it.
The doer, if
exactly.
you will.
And then I'm conscious of what I'm saying so that I can and I'm listening so that if I say something I get wrong, I can correct it. But then I might, if you said something and I was like, let me think about that, then I would reflect on it, say it to myself, find what I wanted to say, and then say it to you.
Yeah.
And all of that is working together seamlessly. And when I say it's kind of obvious, just it's like, isn't that your experience? Isn't it? That's what's happening all the time for us. And so the spirituality becomes an extension of that. You know, one of the reasons that people fall into these other views is because the non-duality, it kind of varies on this, but there's the idea that, oh, well, this is a materialist thing. It's all just the natural world, and there's no, survival of death. There's no God or self, as Deepak calls it, or some greater thing. And what I'm trying to do is go, no, I don't think that's right. There is another way to see this.
Besides materialism, or
yeah,
say idealism.
Idealism is the philosophical term, or it's all consciousness views, or it's all God's dream view, or any of those views.
It's not one or the other necessarily.
There's actually loads of possibles. And the one that interests me is the one we started the conversation with, which is, what if this is the realization of potentiality on ever more emergent levels? So that's a kind of a naturalism. It's all the natural world. And there's no supernatural spirituality outside, but there is spirituality because it didn't stop with biology. It moved on to the evolution of the psyche, this imaginal realm. And this imaginal realm has evolved to an extraordinary level now, which is what, if you practice any form of spirituality, from shamanism right the way through to the present day, is about exploring that and finding, there's a lot going on there, and it's a level of reality. It's an extended naturalism. It didn't end with just the brain. It's like, no, there's more. And we're in contact with each other on these levels, which are non-spatial, in the sense that they're not in this space.
Right. You can't find it or touch it.
You can't touch it, you can't sense it.
That doesn't make it
unreal. But you can sense it in a different way with your psyche. And so in a way that will be too much to go into probably in this conversation, but will be in the pod book, is going, I think we can understand that the psyche has evolved to be able to survive the death of the body. And we can make sense in a rational, naturalistic way these ancient insights across the whole of the world, which you find in spirituality, which is death is not the end. It's the end of the body. You're a psychobiological entity, and the biological bit will stop functioning, but the psyche bit can carry on functioning. And the view I have of the self enables you, in ways that I'll explore probably elsewhere, but enables you to understand how it can carry on functioning.
And this is something that I really love, is the fact that I don't so much resonate with that viewpoint. And it just reminds me of how there are aspects, so many aspects of what you're sharing that completely resonate with me. But just as an example of what a corrective experience it is to be able to disagree, and for you to not be an authoritarian that says this is unquestionable, and that I can take what serves me and what resonates, and then I can question you and say I don't agree.
Definitely.
Or I could critique it and I can challenge it, and that's welcomed. And that's another way that people can heal from that authoritarian non-duality, to be able to engage with folks that are opening. It's, again, like you've said, more of an open system where people can question it, and it's encouraged to question it.
No, we're in the most incredible what is this we're in? It's an enormous mystery. And you'll hear people go, just be with that, the mystery. And actually, I like doing that. Just sit with the mystery. You don't know anything for a moment. It's lovely. But then you have to come back to what you know, because you've got to function in the world. And so you need the best ideas you can find. And they will not only help you navigate the world practically, but they will help you give meaning to your existence. So what I'm involved in as a philosopher is, hey, this is the best way I have found to bring this deep meaning to life. Yeah. But it needs to be rational. And like you said, the days of the authority figure who just knows and is dispensing from on high, enough. We meet as unique individuals doing our best, and then we can share what we found. And my hope is what the pod book's about for me, is to share what I found before I end up dying myself and finding out whether it's true or not. Well, I only get to find out one way, of course. If it's not true, I never know.
I hope you'll find a way to let me know from the
I'll
other
only
side.
ever know if you do survive death. I'll never know if you don't. But that's the great irony, isn't it? But what is important to me is that there is a reasonable, rational, non-woo-woo way, if you like. That it isn't just about faith, or it isn't about... There's ways you can understand this which are perfectly congruent with theories in biology, theories in physics, things which do seem to be helpful, useful, true, things that are helpful in our understanding. And then again, another big piece for me, and I'll just mention it again very, very briefly, and it might be, I know there's some other things you've touched on, but we might have to do that in a different one, but is that for me, I think a whole new level is emerging, like a super system, where psyches are forming a communion of psyches, just like my body is a communion of cells. So in some incredible way, all of these cells have combined to form this supercell organism, Tim, who is more than each one, but is made of them. And in the same way, I think what human beings have been experiencing for some time, and what I've been experiencing throughout my life, as a greater being than me, which traditionally would be called God, but that's a very misleading term, isn't at the beginning of things. What's at the beginning of things is the undifferentiated one. Nothing. Which is in relationship. One as two. Nothing. But that one as two has the potentiality to differentiate as anything. And it's differentiated as all of this. And that process is leading to these higher and higher levels of emergence. So it's led to the soul, or the psyche, and now the soul or the psyche is combining in such a way that we're forming a super system. Imagine it like lots of computers, and you plug them all together, you get a supercomputer. You get lots of souls, and you plug them all together, you get a super soul. You get something more than. And that's happening in a totally naturalistic way. And one of the key ways it's happening, or perhaps the way it's happening, is when we come into a state of communion, of recognizing that everything is one, we start forming this greater oneness, which is conscious of itself. And so what I think we're touching, when we touch that incredible presence, which is so beautiful, so loving, so deep, and just more than, is we're touching that. And what I love about that, for me, in terms of the conversation we're having, is that rather than negating the individual, rather than going, oh, that already existed, and you fell from it, fell into an illusion. If you lose the illusion, it'll just carry on existing, which it's what it's done the whole time. It goes, no, that hasn't always existed. That's the universe flowering into the more than, into
You've said
God.
flowering into God.
Flowering
That's a
into
very
God.
beautiful metaphor.
Yeah, and that the way it's happening is through us as individual psyches or souls. So your individuality, far from being in the way, is it's actually the way that it is forming. And you get to contribute it. And then, the last idea I'd put with that, which I really love, is the thing about Tim, and you, of course, as a multicellular organism, is that all the cells are doing something different. And if all the cells were the same, I'd be like a slime mold. I'd be just like, there'd be this pile of cells around the chair, and nothing would be happening. And you go, well, they're all working together, sort of, but they're all they're all the same.
Yeah, it's complete uniformity.
But they've individuated to such a degree that they're all doing different things, which enables this complexity. That's why our individuality matters. Because we are individuating, and what we bring to God, what we bring to the more than, what we bring to the super soul, what we bring to that beautiful big presence, is the fact that we're not the same. And that you're you.
Thank goodness.
And you have a unique experience. You have a different way of relating to the world, different ideas, different everything about you, different passions, different imaginations, and so do I, and so does everybody. And that's what we bring to this greater communion. So that spirituality now becomes, how can you become you in a more emergent way and bring that to the whole of the process, to this level of the process, and also to the sublime thing which is emerging.
And what a major shift that is.
And then it's like, yeah, that's why your life really matters.
I like the going from a communion of cells to a communion of souls.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Yeah. So maybe that's where we should leave this part of the conversation.
I think we can do that for now.
And maybe we can come back and
Fill in
look
some
at some other things
after
a cup of coffee and
bananas,
some
apples.
biscuits.
Sounds great.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So in part 2, we're going to cover some exciting new ground, and we're going to focus in on the notion of unquestionable, self-evident, ultimate truth, going into deconstructing direct pointers that feature strongly in non-duality, and how coming to really kind of question the notion of ultimate truth, how that can free people to be able to explore more compelling, potentially more compelling perspectives and experiences of reality.